Okay, so I guess you can see my screen now, right? By the way, guys, yung nakalagay sa TBL Hub, if in case you're able to access it, I still have to make some adjustment on it. I overlooked some of the changes that I was supposed to place there. Later on, I'll try to update that kasi pinagsama ko na yung mga files ko dyan sa mga yan. So, iba na po yung makikita nyo dyan for the PowerPoint, okay? So, let's start. Okay, so naka-set up na yung recording natin. Let me just share my PowerPoint. Ayan. Okay, so this time we're going to be discussing about science and technology during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Now, if you still have time later on, we'll be talking about also, also incorporate the science and technology during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, now when you talk about Middle Ages and Renaissance, actually intertwined yan. Middle Ages is also considered as the Dark Ages when it comes to Europe, because this is the time when this actually started around 450 AD. That's 450 years after the death of Christ, and it's actually considered as the Dark Ages because of the idea that the classical culture of Roman and Greek civilization has slowly died out. Okay, so yung mga influence ng Romans and the Greeks nawawala na, and at the same time lahat pumasok na diyan yung mga, if you're watching yung mga palabas sa TV, yung mga Vikings, yan, that's also the start of the Vikings. Um, the Ottoman Empire, this is actually the time when Islamic civilization also flourished, and also considered as part of the rise in the side of ancient Chinese civilization. Okay? So, dyan yung mga peaks ng mga civilization na yan. Now, to give you a background about the Middle Ages, I guess you're familiar with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Alam niyo yon? Siguro naman. Alam niyo yon, guys? O hindi talaga. Snow White and the
Yes, ma'am.
Snow White.
Alam po.
Yan. How about Robin Hood?
Yes, ma'am.
Robin Hood.
Alam din po.
Ba't kayong dalawa lang sumasagot? Saan na yung iba? Babon. Cheryl, do you know about the time of Cinderella?
Opo, ma'am.
Yes.
Ayan.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So at least familiar kayo dun sa mga panahon na yon. So panahon ni Maleficent, yon, yung yung Sleeping Beauty, yan. Those are actually considered the times of medieval period, okay? So alam niyo naman yung siguro mga itsura ng mga prinsesa at saka prinsipe rin during the time. Now, the type of civilization or the type of governance, although we're not going to be talking about politics per se, but at least you have a background what type of environment they lived in. Okay? So, people were living in what we call a feudal system. So, you have their kings who actually controls over the land, and then under the king, all the relatives are considered as nobles, and are usually the ones who are prevailing or providing military control over the country. Then aside from the nobilities, the lower ranking than the nobles are the knights. So yung King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, yan yun. Then you have now the peasants. Hindi sila poor ha, peasants lang sila. Iba po yung category ng poor. Um, Peasants, these are your workers. So, hindi pwede naman natin sabihin na kumakain ka ng 3, 4 na beses sa isang araw pero hindi ka nagmamay-ari ng lupa. The difference that the knights, the nobles and the kings are usually the ones who are having control over the lands. The peasants do not own any piece of land during that time. So this was actually a very famous or um, the type of government for most of European countries. Okay, so England, France, Germany, lahat na may kings and princesses niyan. Okay? Then at the same time, the first European tawag to, the first European university was also established during that time. Um, there were actually three. Then after 200 years, saka sumunod yung iba. So you have Bologna, Oxford, and Paris. So those are the three universities that were first initially established. Now take note, nauna pa rin nag-establish ang mga universities, yung mga Islamic civilization, okay? So usually when you talk about the universities, they're more on the arts. Yan, may medicine na rin sila. Okay, so ganyan ang setup nila. So most of the times, those who are studying are considered nobilities because they are the ones who can pay for the schooling. So tingnan niyo yung itsura ng kanilang eskwelahan. Yan. I think this is part of Oxford. Okay. Now, it was during this time that most of the uh, works or information were actually being translated from Arabic, and some are from Greek. Remember when I mentioned about during the Islamic civilization, most of those information that are coming from Alexandria are being take copied by the Arabic scholars, and they're being shared in their uh, areas. And then saka ngayon nagkakaroon ng access yung mga Westerners to this particular information. As you can see here, the one that I included in the pictures, you have actually a script showing them studying from the information from Socrates. So this is how they were able to learn. Yun nga lang, since may Arabic influence, yung damit ni Socrates naging Arabic na rin. Okay? Then in terms of medieval science, you have actually Sir Saint Albert Magnet. So this is Saint Albert Magnet. So he actually wrote a couple of books with regards to natural history and minerals. Then you have Frederick II, an emperor in Holy Roman Empire, who actually talked about different birds, and then also Islamic influence, including the optics. Now, given that again the information are coming from Islamic influence or Islamic origin, they were already talking about these resources, at saka ngayon parang ginagawa na nila, pinag-aaralan na rin nila. Okay? Now, one thing that rose during the medieval times is that they criticized Aristotle's theory of motion, and the persons who talked about that is Buridan and Oresme, given by the influence also by the Islamic civilization. You have also Grosseteste Teste, who thought science was more of theological truth. So 'pag nagsabi ka ng science, it's again based on religion, because during that particular time, religion has a strong hold on everything, even politics. 'Pag sinabi ng cardinal, if you kaya nga nagkaroon ng mga Robin Hood nung unang panahon, nagnanakaw sa mga mayayaman at pinamimigay sa mahihirap, is because of the influence of the church during that time. So that was the original arrangement back then. Actually, to the point na halos mas makapangyarihan ang simbahan kaysa sa mga hari. Okay, and this actually gave rise to the schism, yung paghihiwalay ng church into two the different sects that we have. And then at the same time, yung paghiwalay ng England from the Catholic Church as well. Okay. And then at the same time, this was also when Grosseteste also studied about optics. Okay? And most of the time, pag ikaw ay nag-aaral naman ng science na against sa nakasanayan na ideology, you're gonna be considered as a heretic. We say heretic, masama ano ka, isa kang kampo ng kadiliman, and isa kang demonyo, parang gano'n sinasabi nila, eh. Anything that you go against the religious beliefs, you're considered to be as someone who is as a person of evil incarnate. Okay, kaya nga pagdating ng panahon, si tawag nito, si Nicholas Copernicus was actually considered as a heretic during his time because of the ideologies that he was actually sharing to the public. Now, let's go to the different inventions. So, one of the inventions that was very famous during the medieval was the horse collar. Dati kasi, nilalagay dito sa harapan lang nung mga kabayo yung, yung kanilang panghila. So, imagine niyo na lang parang ano, nasasakal kayo na nga lang 'di ba merong nakaharang dito ta's wala naman kayo ginagamit yung dibdib niyo panghila do'n. So, siyempre mahihirapan yung kabayo. By creating the horse collar, mas nakakabit ngayon sa katawan nila, mas malakas yung hatak ngayon nung mga kabayo during that time. And then, if you're going to the next slide that we have here, this is the windmill, the vertical windmill, and the water mill. So remember the windmill from Persia, horizontal siya, nakadikit sa lupa. Ito nakataas, yung isa naman ay nakalagay sa ibabaw ng tubig. So usually this again from the wind and this is from the flowing water. So this was actually a very famous uh, architecture that you will see beside the large flowing waters. It's used for furnace, pwede siya sa grinding as well. Same ideas then with the Persian windmills during the past. Another one is the clock and the watch. So, the idea of the clock, remember the clock is also considered to be coming from from China. So, they actually made a little adjustments on it. They use metal and wooden, tawag to, yung mga uh, items doon to make it mechanical. Yan. So, ito yung mismong loob ng mechanism ng clock and this is actually the European version. So, this is actually the internal of the first mechanical clock. And you can see still the mechanical clock in Brussels, Belgium. Okay, so pag meron kayong konting barya, you can go to Belgium, you will see the clock there. And pag nag-time siya, this is a giant cuckoo clock, may lalabas dyan sa taas. Okay, so yan po yung mechanical clock during the medieval pa to. Okay, ito yung maliit na version, ito yung pinakamalaking version. Then, the next one is the compass. So, we know that the compass originated from China. Actually, parang siyang part ng bagway, di ba? Yung sa feng shui. But they used the same concept. They needed a magnetic part that would point to the magnetic north. So, they gave rise to the actual compass. Then you have also the rudder. Yung rudder, ito yung nasa dulo. Sino dito na nakapunta na dun sa ah, Venice Piazza no, dati? Yung nakita niyo yung ano doon, yung ilog sa Venice Piazza? Guys, Miss Babon, Miss Labiga, Estor. Nakapunta na kayo sa Venice Piazza?
Iba po.
Hindi pa? Ano pa yan?
Opo.
Si Babon hindi pa nakapunta. Yung controversial na ano, Jejemon na ilog sa loob ng ano, Venice Piazza. Meron doon kasing ilog. Ilog na man-made na river. This was actually a concept based on Venice, France. Venice, Italy. Sorry ba yan? Venice, France. Ang layo nun. It's actually in Venice, Italy. 'Di ba? If you will notice, if you've been to the Grand Canal in Venice Piazza, meron dong nagsasagwan. Para siyang ano, meron siyang, hindi siya yung sagwan na ginagawa dun 'pag gano'n. Medyo mechanicalize siya pero ang ginagawa dun yung parang merong nag-aano lang sa likod dun, yun po yung pinaka-rudder. That's what you call a rudder. Okey, yung nasa likod ng barko, okey? Now this is actually originally coming from China and then siyempre in-improve nila konti, inayos sila and this is actually, the one that we can see on the bottom of the ship. So 'pag nakita niyo if you watch Titanic, 'yan yung malaki na sa likod ng hélice, 'yan po 'yon. This is the rudder, okay? 'Yan po. And then another one is lenses with spectacles. So this is actually a combination of the study of light and also with the glass and the lenses. So if you will notice, this is the original ojos. Sa Spanish, it's called ojos. Tama ba? I'm sorry, I forgot already. Ayan. So, tama, ojos kasi yun yung ginagamit sa mata. Um, Kahoy, gawa sa kahoy, This is how they place it. They actually allow it to rest on the nose. Yung nga lang sa ating Pilipino, good luck na lang sa pagpapatungan, 'di ba? Lalo na do'n sa iba. Okay lang sana kung mataba yung ilong, at least malaki yung kakapitan. Eh, paano kung masyadong dumadaustos yung mga ilong natin, 'di ba? And then here is another version of the spectacle. Okay, so this time, ito naman, medyo bakal na yung kanyang frame. Okay? And the other one is actually has a handle. So, pwede mo na siyang tanggalin. Yung ibang version, isang mata lang ang ginagamit nila. Pero meron silang hawakan lagi. So, gaganon lang nila. Parang akala mo yung maliit na magnifying glass. Okay? Now, another invention during that time is gunpowder and cannon. So, kung nanonood kayo kina Bugs Bunny, tsaka ano, sino ba 'to, si Roadrunner and ano, Wile E. Coyote 'yan. So, yun yung mga cannons. And this is actually introduced when gunpowder was made available by the Mongols. Okay? Yan. So, gamit na gamit yan. So, if you watch Pirates of the Caribbean, you'll see this also. Then paper making, again, so as I mentioned in the Chinese civilization, the Chinese way of producing paper was the one that has been maximized by the whole world. So ito yung ginagawa niya. Actually, this is more on the Chinese, not Chinese, Japanese hand making, paper making, handmade paper. Okay? So, yung mismong nandiya diyan, yung slushy na nandodoon is actually filled with a mixture of water and then the fiber. Then naayusin niya kailangan pantay, tas sa kanya aangatin then patutuyuin. Okay? So that is the paper making. Now, since we also have paper, then of course, gumawa na sila ng kanilang version ng book. So this was actually the first one who made his mechanical printing press or the movable wood iron or metal printing press was Johann Gutenberg. I did not include the name, so let me just include the name lang ha. I forgot to include. It's Johannes Gutenberg. Importante yan guys kasi he is actually and Johannes Gutenberg. Okay? So he made his first metal printing press. So this is paper press. And then if you're going to look on the, wait lang, let me just save this. Yan. So if you're going to look on the diagram that I included here, gantong itsura po ng mga press noon. So although mukha siyang dikit-dikit pero sorry guys, wait lang ha. Wait lang. Hello? Hello? Eh, klase ako, bakit? Hi guys, sorry. Susan ang kulit eh, Sir Vargas ang ungulit. Okay, so going back. So as I mentioned before, so yeah, this is mechanical press already. Next, we have, let me just go back to my PowerPoint. Yan. So the distillation and alcohol. Remember in Middle East, they already started, particularly in Persia, they have already alcohol, and also in the Islamic civilization, we already talked about that. So actually, during the time that this was already created during the Islamic civilization, within the Islamic civilization context, this was also in line with the medieval Europe, yes. Okay. Daming gumugulit. And then, in terms of astrology, yan. So, in terms of medicine, very limited ang kanilang diagnosis and prognosis. Unlike in China, di ba, may 5 steps sila ng prognosis or diagnosis in terms of medicine. And then, you also have, it's more on ancient texts pa lang sila. Okay? And then included sa kanilang therapy, prayers, healing, charms, and faith healing as well. Okay? And then they are also using herbs. And then you have also the book in Salermo wherein they have the first medical school. So yun, that's the School of Salermo. Then other invention included also the counterweight trebuchet. So this is actually the one that allows the catapult to go back to its original position. Kasi 'di ba 'pag binato mo 'yon, nakapwesto nagbato na siya, 'di ba? So hihilain mo pa 'yon. So with adding counterweights, it prompts the catapult to go back to its original position. So ilo-load mo na lang 'yon. Okay? So this is actually used in the battles in the Crusades in Byzantium. And then you have also longbow. Remember, during the Hundred Years' War, the Hundred Years' War is the fight between the French and the English. Okay? And they were using the longbow pa. So as I mentioned in the Chinese civilization, noong time na meron na sila, crossbow na sa China. Now, they did have the crossbow. Yun nga lang, late pa rin. So imagine mo, 100 years ang difference yan nito ng pag-establish ng crossbow. And then you have the heavy plow, yung ginagamit natin sa pag-aararo. Yan. So this came about in the Slavic lands before it went to Italy and then to Rhineland. Yan. Then you have also horseshoes. Yan, para sa mga alagang kabayo noon para mas madali silang makakapaglakad po. Okay? So you have also the artesian well. Remember dun sa Snow White, yung Disney Snow White, yung kumakanta-kanta siya. Ito po yung artesian well. Tapos din biglang sudungaw si Prince Charming. So this is actually started with Artois in France. Okay, so was the first one that was created. So this allows them to get underground water. Dito sa Pilipinas, meron ding artesian, pero ang tawag natin dito ay poso. Hindi poso negro guys, yung poso, yung de bomba na tinatawag, yung ginaganon-ganon pa natin. Then you have also the wheelbarrow. So this is used for mining, farming, construction. So it was around in 1170s to 1250. Yan. So this is actually the one that they had before. Then they were able to cast iron. So nag-smelt na sila ng iron. Okay, so if you watch yung kay Sleeping Beauty, kaya nakagawa sila ng maraming mga iron na harang kay Maleficent because of smelting. Then they also have the hourglass around 1338. So they are actually able to uh, use it as a measurement of time. Ngayon, yung mga hourglass na nagiging limited na lang siya as a decoration or egg timer. Okay, so babalik na rin yan. And then, during battles, they have what we call the plate armor. Ito yung plate armor. Now, this was actually used in battle. So, imagine mo lang, it can protect you, but at certain parts. Okay? Remember, parang pag meron kang armor, medyo limited yung kilos mo. So, natatakpan yung ulo mo, pinoprotektahan kasi yung legs. By the way, this is what we call a mail or chain mail. Okay? As in chain. Tapos M-A, parang sulat ang spelling niya. Okay, so ito naman 'to, nilalagay ito sa loob ng armor. So imagine mo na lang puno-puno ka ng bakal or balot na balot ka sa bakal, limited ang kilos mo, okay? And then meron ka pa nito sa loob. Okay, now the purpose of having this is to prevent us to protect you against swords. Uso nun kasi yung mga sword, eh. Yun nga lang talo 'to pagdating sa pana kasi since maliliit 'yan, puwedeng tumagos yung pana pa rin, okey? Yun. So, unless magaling pumana yung kalaban mo, alam kung saan kayo tatamaan, 'yan. So, usually open yun dito sa gilid sa may braso, okey? Tapos yung parte ng kilikilid kasi dito lang mula sa shoulder, pababa lang siya ang takip. Yung mga areas na madaling isangga, ta's yung elbow 'yan, okey? And then sa mukha. And then another one of their invention is the spinning wheel. So this is remember we talk about Indian and Chinese civilization. Maliliit yung version dun sa kanila ngayon. Since nakita nila yon, then they have their own version already. Remember Sleeping Beauty. Then they have also the chess, di ba yung Seljuk sa Traj in Indian civilization, yan. Which is also in Persia. Then you also have mirrors, and this is actually made from mercury. Then you have oil painting, okay, and then you have also quarantine. So this is actually started off when the Black Plague spread or the Black Death spread. This was one of the pandemic that hit Europe and most part of the world back in the day. Okay. Now, here naman is more on some of the tawag to, technology that was available during the Renaissance. Now, take note that the Renaissance actually started in Italy. Okay? This is made by the tawag nito, um, so it started with Italy, particularly with the help of a particular family. So this was an Italian of origin. It actually the start of the rebirth. Okay, we say the rebirth. They want to bring back the classics. Diba? Remember from 900 AD to almost 1400, the classical Roman and Greek civilization was already um, put out. Okay, so halos na nakalimutan na siya. And then the Medici family, okay, actually paid artists and scholars to study about the classical Roman and Greek civilizations to put it back into place. Okay, lalong-lalo na sa Italy kasi very famous sila being the center of Rome. So they want to bring back some of the culture back into their land. Okay, so here are some of those uh, things that they brought about. Okay, unang-una, yung telescope. Saan na yun? Yan. So this is actually the telescope that was created by, wait lang ah. So this was actually the telescope that was used by Galileo Galilei when he studied about the astronomical uh, the planets. And then ito yung key Galileo, and this one was for Isaac Newton. And then the other one is, wait lang guys ha, parang hindi nakikita yung text ko eh. Wait lang, bakit hindi ka nakikita? Ayun, hindi ko lang talaga siya nakita kasi hindi ko siya hinayagang lumabas. And then the other one is the musket. Wait lang, wait lang. Ayan. Okay. So the musket was actually, yan. Wait lang. Yan. So the musket was actually a rifle that was used into battle, and it was developed in Spain around 1500. And it's actually using a metal ball that could hurt people. Okay, so yung unang bala is actually made up from lead. Okay, So, it's actually very, very large. Imagine niyo na lang European 'to. So, average height na lang ng tao is around 5'5". Now, the problem with musket is that it actually has a shorter range. Now, if you want to have a longer range of firearms, you have to increase the barrel. Ito yung tinatawag na barrel kung saan dumadaan yung bala. Okay, so the longer the barrel, the longer the shot or where it's gonna go to. Okay, so it's gonna take some time for it to travel. So, an example, let me just show you some videos about that musket. So, nung unang panahon o actually until later time, gumamit sila ng musket, yung ano, modern day na shotgun, 'yan. Okay, so here, ano, so 'yan. So, 'pag pumutok talaga 'yan, mausok and then you have to load it as well. 'Yan, so here, 'yan nilalagay yung okey, para makita ninyo. So, that's how it's being fired. Saan na yung loading? Yan. So, here, hindi na i-load. Ayan. Ayan o. So, if you can see here, ginagawa niya is lalagyan niya ng pulbura dito sa part na to. Yan. Tapos, sisindihan niya yon para paputukin. Tapos sa kabilang dulo, saka ilo-load yan. So here, meron sila usually mga small packets of, call this, gunpowder. Ilo-load nila doon sa mismong dulo ng barrel, then also dun sa gilid. Then papuputukin na nila yon. Okay, so that's how they are actually able to use the musket. Okay, so yan. So very hard yan. Later na lang nakadevelop ng mga matataas na kalibre ng baril. Okay, so we mentioned already about the rudder. Okay, yan. Yan. So we have also the flushing toilet. Yan. Okay, so the flushing toilet or what we call the water closet was actually goes back as far as 1589 and when it was invented by Harrington. So Harrington invented a valve when you pull it down. Kaya if you're going to go to very old houses, yung flush nila, yung pang flush na pinipindot natin para lumabas yung tubig, makikita nyo hinihila siya, may tali siya. So doon marirelease yung water. Okay, so hindi niyo sasabihin water na flush toilet, puwede niyong gamitin na, water closet din yung term, okay? So the actual, the first one it was used was for Queen Elizabeth the First. Remember sa mga kaharian noon is puro hagdanan, puro ilang layers 'yan ng castle and then naglagay sila ng pipes pababa. But the problem with that pipe, siyempre 'pag mainit yung panahon, yung amoy umaangat, 'di ba? So, nakakarating pa rin 'yan kung saang kwarto merong nakalabas yung dulo, okay. So, nilagyan nila siya ngayon ng parang, water, parang meron silang nilalagay sa ilalim. I forgot the Filipino term for that one, eh, na yung water na yun, pine-prevent niya yung hangin na mag-backflow doon, okay? Then the another, invention that they had during the medieval was the adding machine. So it's actually Blaise Pascal who invented, the first digital calculator in 1642, and it was usually used for tax collection, okay? And it was called as the Pascaline. Then you have also thermometer. Yan. So the thermometer was actually invented by Galileo in 1593, which allowed temperature variations to be measured. And then see Fahrenheit also he made this mercurial thermometer, and which was considered as the modern thermometer. Ito thermometer siya, pero imagine yun lang guys, paano natin to ang hirap i-measure yan kasi malaki. Yung kay Fahrenheit, almost similar to the modern thermometer that we're using right now. Yan. So usually when the temperature changes, it actually allows the material to expand inside, 'di ba? Kaya yung ginagamit nun is either mercury, pag silver yung nasa loob, or silver colored, and then pag red, it's alcohol. Then another one was the submarine. Okay. I'm going to skip to the pictures para yun na lang makita nyo. So the submarine was invented by Cornelius Drebbel. So and also by Leonardo da Vinci. Okay? So the concept of the ang unang gumawa was Da Vinci, then kinuha niya yung concept based on the diagram by Da Vinci. Gumawa si Drebbel ng ah, kanyang version nung submarine ni Da Vinci, okay? So yung experiment ni Drebbel, he could actually allow it to be submerged underwater for a few hours, okay? And as far as 15 feet below sea level. Another one is the match. Okay. So fire was already established or has been used by men for already for a long, long time, but it was Robert Boyle who first made the match. He actually allowed sticks to be rubbed together. However, the one that Robert Boyle created was a little bit unsafe kasi mas madali siyang mag-react. Yung parang strike anywhere, yung malagyan lang ng konting friction, nag-aapoy na kaagad. So, or mainitan lang konti, madali na siyang mag-spark. So, medyo delikado yon. Okay? So, ngayon, yung kaya nga ginagamit natin yung safety match, yung mismong posporo na binibili if you were able to use posporo, meron siyang flint na tinatawag. When you say flint, guys, ito yung kuskusan. Yun yung ini-strikean ninyo. Yun, that's what you call the flint. Okay? And then, okay. Ito pala dapat kong ibahin itong pwesto. Wait lang guys. Okay. Yan. So here is another picture of Drubel's version of the submarine. Okay. So you have here the cannon. So we already discussed about that. Ito. So this is the mariner compass also. Ito naman po yung compound microscope by the Hans Janssen and Lippershey. So sila yung nagkumbento ng first compound microscope. Okay, so they actually use the lenses to come up with this compound microscope. Then during that time, they also invented wallpaper. Okay, so here are some example patterns of wallpaper during the Renaissance. Okay, and then you also have parachute. Okay, so this is actually based on Da Vinci's design. And this is the blast furnace that uses charcoal to heat up and melt iron. Okay. So wood kasi is actually it's gonna take so long, but mas expensive. But coal or yung uling, mas mura siya. Okay. So nauso na ngayon yung paggamit ng uling. Okay. And then you also have, of course, see uh, Copernicus, who actually started with the heliocentric model of the universe. Later on, we will be discussing the Copernican evolution. So, ihiwalay natin siya. Okay? So, yan po yung sa medieval and Renaissance. Now, let me just include also about, okay, include din natin yung sa Industrial Revolution. But I think you don't have much time because I have some videos that I like to share with you. Wait lang ha. I-update ko yung screen, yung PowerPoint in a bit. Let me just show you some videos for Middle Ages. Yan. So these are actually some videos about Middle Ages, how it started, why it's considered as a part of the Dark Ages. Yan. Ay, wait lang. Wait lang guys, hindi ko pa pala na-share sa inyo. Masyadong nagmamadali. Okay. Guys, don't forget some of the information here kasi although it's some of them have been mentioned already in the back discussion of Islamic Chinese, but it's still part of the medieval and the Renaissance because of the timeline. Okay, so please take note of the names there.
Movies and TV have made life in a castle look like an episode of MTV Cribs. Provided you're one of the nobles, but it wasn't all feasts and festivals. Castles were dark, dank, smelly fortresses loaded with vermin and disease. Today we're exploring what life was really like in a medieval castle. If you were one of the lucky ruling class, you got to indulge in rich wine and the occasional hot bath. For the most part, there wasn't much comfort or relaxation to be found outside of going to church and torturing an enemy to death. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. Oh, and that's not enough. Leave a comment to us and let us know what topics you would like to hear about. For Europeans in medieval times, plumbing was a distant dream, which means there was no such thing as running water and absolutely no way to flush a toilet. Waste just collected in a big cesspool beneath the toilets, essentially making every castle a giant porta-potty. Now picture that porta-potty on the hottest day of the summer. Maybe that's why everyone on Game of Thrones is so angry all the time. And it wasn't just the perpetual stench of feces making castle life stinky. No running water means no baths unless you were super rich. So all the servants in a castle were running around smelling as ripe as my old gym bag. On top of that, the servants couldn't afford medicine like lords and nobles could. So your average castle dweller was wandering around intensely ill and trying to make do with home remedies or praying to God it would go away. And hey, speaking of those toilets, privacy wasn't really a thing in castles unless you owned the place. So when you had to run off to the bathroom to do your necessaries, you'd be doing it on a long wooden bench with several holes cut into it, in full view of your friends, co-workers, and really anyone else who happened to walk by. Again, there was no flushing, so your business would just drop down into a gigantic pit of horrors inside the castle. And let's hope you never accidentally dropped your wagon keys in there, because you might as well be throwing it into a septic volcano. You know how cramped the house gets when one or two relatives come to visit? Multiply that times 100, and that's what living in a castle was like. Castles required dozens of servants just to maintain the day-to-day workings, not to mention the several generations of the lord and lady's families living there, and all of their personal servants and attendants. It was like living in a tiny cramped city, all serving the needs of a single family. We've all seen enough fantasy films and Disney cartoons to know that castles had dungeons where the lord and lady could throw criminals, political opponents, or really anyone who happened to offend them at any particular moment. What they tend to skip in the Disney films is that these prisoners were routinely tortured in grotesque ways. One popular method involved letting the prisoner be eaten alive from the inside out by hungry rats. Isn't that fun to watch? In addition to being just plain old sadistic, the common belief was that the extreme pain helped cleanse a person of their sins, which brings terrifying new meaning to the phrase, "This is for your own good." And while we're talking about rats, rats can be tricky to deal with even today, so imagine what it was like living in a gigantic, dark, damp castle with no modern traps or pest control. Rats were everywhere, and there really wasn't much you could do about them. You just sort of accepted rat infestation as part of normal life. Kind of like the Chevy Malibu of the day. After a while, you'd imagine people would get used to the rats, but many medieval folks were deathly afraid of them. Certainly didn't help that they were a popular instrument of torture, or that around this time they carried a plague that eradicated around half the population of Europe. At this point, it should come as no surprise that castle-dwelling folk like to stay sauced. Because the best way to get through a day inside an overcrowded, poo-smelling house of rat torture was with a mug of ale firmly in hand. The lords and ladies got to drink pretty much whatever they wanted, including fine wines, beers, and spirits. But the servants, they had to take what they could get. It was actually safer to drink alcohol than water, because most water you could find would be so contaminated, the TSA would confiscate it as a weapon. With all that drinking going on, you'd assume that most people in a castle wouldn't drag themselves out of bed until at least noon. And while that may have been true for the lords, the servants had to get up to work as soon as the sun came up. Electricity obviously didn't exist yet, so sunlight was crucially important. Castles are dark places, even during the day, so the servants had to capitalize on every second of sunlight just to get their work done. Even if you didn't work in a castle, unless you were wealthy, odds are you worked as a merchant or a craftsman or a laborer, so you had to be up at the crack of dawn if you expected to make any money. Contrary to popular belief, people like taking baths in medieval times as much as they do today. It's just that clean water was hard to come by, especially for the lower class. We really can't stress how important plumbing is. The tub itself was a cartoonishly giant wooden bucket that could be carried from room to room in the castle for people to bathe in. Didn't approach the definition of either hygienic or private, but at least you got to scrub off some of that castle funk. Castles were essentially giant basements with nothing in the way of insulation. They were designed primarily as fortresses rather than dwellings, so everything was made of cold stone, and what few windows there were didn't let in much sunlight. The lords and ladies would have the nicer rooms with fireplaces and windows, but the servants' quarters were often located in the lower interior of the castles, frigid, lightless warrens that were breeding grounds for diseases that thrive in the damp cold. At that point, I think I'd rather sleep outside. There was always something going on in a castle, whether celebrating some festival or holiday or entertaining a visiting noble family. So consequently, huge extravagant meals were the norm rather than the exception. If you were one of the cooks, you got to spend all day preparing the feast and then have your own meager meal in the kitchen. Meanwhile, the lords and ladies of the house would entertain their guests at a long wooden meal table with people seated according to their importance. The important people would be seated at the head of the table, while the servants would be tucked all the way in the back, out of sight. Because nothing ruins a meal like having to look at poor people. It's like going to the Waffle House after your wedding, but sadder. Meals were taken in the great hall of the castle, and as we mentioned, you were seated in the hall according to your status. But your status didn't only affect where you got to sit, it also determined what you got to eat. The lord and lady and their family and guests would be served gourmet dishes with exotic spices and lavish ingredients. If you were a servant, however, you got to watch them eat this food while tucking in some stew or a meat pie at the dim end of the table. But hey, it could be worse. At least you're eating. More than 85% of the town's residents were considered peasants and weren't allowed inside the castle. So even though they were working the land for the lord or lady, it was up to them to feed themselves and their families. The lord and lady of a castle were responsible for governing the land, which included regularly making a bunch of difficult decisions and engaging in fierce political negotiations, so they couldn't be bothered with trivial matters like preparing their meals or making sure the castle didn't fall into disrepair. That's why every castle had a huge staff of servants. In addition to the standard housekeeping duties required to keep the castle running, they also had to attend to the every need and whim of the lord and lady and their families. Nobody's job was easy, but at least the lords and ladies got to kick back once in a while. As we've established by now, castles were essentially reeky stone garbage heaps. Part of the never-ending effort to keep the castle relatively clean was the spreading of rushes, reeds, and herbs across the floor. The plants would absorb the unsightly spills and hopefully cover up some of the more unbearable stenches. Switching out the old rushes for clean ones was not unlike moving a body, as beer, grease, fragments, bones, spittle, excrements of dogs and cats, and everything that is nasty would be revealed. Basically, wherever you went in the castle, you were walking on a layer of barely concealed filth. Sounds like my college dorm room. In the time before microwaves, George Foreman grills, and sur la table, all cooking was done over open flames, which can be a problem if you're cooking in a building full of timber and hay. In the first half of the Middle Ages, most kitchens were built out of wood for reasons that history has not yet adequately explained. Consequently, your entire kitchen catching fire over a stray ember from today's lunch service was a constant possibility. Everyone and everything were flame broiled. It wasn't until later that stone became the building material of choice, and hearths were constructed to keep cook fires contained. Should just like this video. Every castle had an on-site chapel, so the lord and lady could attend morning mass. In fact, along with the Great Hall, the chapel was the defining structure of the castle. Everything else was constructed around those two primary rooms. If you lived in a particularly fancy castle, the chapel would be 2 stories, so that the lord and lady and their families could sit in the upper level and literally look down on the servants. Look at that poor person. So gross. The Middle Ages were tough, so much so that even the best case scenario of living in a castle was pretty much a miserable experience. How would you like it in a castle? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.
But what exactly is movable typeset, and why was it such a big? Movable metal typeset printing is one of the greatest inventions of the last millennium. It revolutionized the way people created and produced books. But what exactly is movable typeset, and why was it such a big deal? Before the movable type printing press was invented, books were expensive and either copied by hand or made using block printing. Copying books by hand was tedious and time-consuming, and scribes sometimes made copying errors. Block printing meant that text and images had to be carved into blocks of wood, then covered with ink and stamped onto a page. These blocks were time-consuming to create and use. By 1450, less than 30,000 books existed in all of Europe. All of this would change with the innovations of Johannes Gutenberg. In the late 1390s, Johannes Gutenberg was born into an upper-class family in Mainz, Germany. He learned various crafts like blacksmithing, jewel cutting, and goldsmithing. Around 1450, he began developing new techniques for improving the printing press. Gutenberg created a process using movable metal type, which meant that letters could be rearranged into countless patterns. This was faster and more accurate than any previous method. It made books and tracts much more affordable. Gutenberg's first major project